The notification on my phone read like any other automated security alert. Motion detected at Lake George property, 3:47 p.m. I almost dismissed it without thinking, the way you ignore spam calls or grocery store promotions. But something made me pause as I sat in the Starbucks parking lot, waiting for Emma to finish her SAT prep class. The lake house had been empty since Labor Day weekend. Nobody should have been there. I tapped the notification and watched my 17-year marriage crumble in real time through grainy security footage. There was Michael, my husband of nearly 2 decades, carrying luggage through the front door of our family retreat. Behind him walked a young blonde woman I'd never seen before, laughing as she spun around on our wraparound porch like she owned the place. She was wearing one of those flowy sundresses that looked effortless, but probably cost more than most people's rent, and the way Michael's hand rested on the small of her back spoke of intimacy that made my stomach lurch. The timestamp showed they'd been there for 3 days. 3 days while I'd been home in Westfield, managing Emma's college prep schedule and handling the quarterly taxes for Michael's real estate development firm. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days while I'd been wondering why he'd seemed so distracted during our anniversary dinner last week, checking his phone between courses and offering vague explanations about a difficult client in Albany. I sat frozen in my car, watching strangers make themselves comfortable in the space where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, where Michael and I had honeymooned, where we'd taught Emma to swim in the crystal-clear waters of Lake George. The woman moved through our kitchen with casual familiarity, opening cabinets like she'd memorized their contents. She poured wine from a bottle I recognized as the vintage Michael and I had been saving for Emma's high school graduation. My hands trembled as I scrolled through more alerts. They'd been triggering the motion sensors for a week, maybe longer. Pool lights activating at midnight. Security system armed and disarmed at odd hours. The hot tub showing unusual activity patterns. While I'd been home playing the dutiful wife, coordinating Emma's schedule and managing our social calendar, my husband had been playing house with someone who looked young enough to be his daughter. The passenger door opened and Emma slid into the seat beside me, her dark hair pulled back in the messy bun she favored for studying, her arms full of practice test booklets and college brochures. She took one look at my face, and her cheerful chatter about analogies and essay prompts died mid-sentence. "Mom, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I quickly closed the security app, forcing my expression into something resembling normalcy. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just work stress." "How did the practice test go?" But Emma had inherited my intuition along with my stubborn streak. She studied my face with the intensity she usually reserved for calculus problems, her green eyes narrowing with concern. "Are you sure? You seem really shaken up." "I'm fine, really. Just tired." I started the car, needing motion, needing to process what I'd seen before I said something I couldn't take back. "Let's grab dinner on the way home." "Chinese sound good?" Emma agreed, though she continued watching me with that worried expression that made her look older than her 16 years. As we drove through the familiar streets of our Connecticut suburb, past the manicured lawns and colonial homes that had defined our family's life for nearly 2 decades, I tried to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Michael Coleman. Successful. Commercial real estate developer, pillar of the Westfield community, father who'd never missed one of Emma's science fairs or school plays, had moved his girlfriend into our family's sacred space. Not just any property, but the lake house that had been in my family for 3 generations. The place where my grandmother had taught me to identify wildflowers and where my mother had told me stories about women who were stronger than they knew. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael built his career on understanding property values, zoning laws, and real estate contracts. He negotiated million-dollar deals and advised clients on the intricacies of property ownership. Yet somehow, in his arrogance or carelessness, he'd overlooked one crucial detail about our beloved retreat in the Adirondacks. My name is Sarah Coleman, though I'm seriously considering going back to my maiden name of Matthews after what I'm about to tell you. At 42, I thought I had life figured out. Marketing executive turned freelance consultant, mother to an incredible teenage daughter, wife to a man I believed loved and respected me. We lived in one of those picture-perfect Connecticut suburbs where everyone knows your business but pretends they don't, where the houses are colonial and the secrets are colonial-sized too. I'd met Michael during my senior year at UConn when he was getting his MBA and I was finishing my marketing degree. He was ambitious, charming, and had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when he focused his attention on you. We married 2 years later in a ceremony at the lake house, surrounded by family and friends, with the Adirondack Mountains providing a breathtaking backdrop for what I thought would be our happily ever after. Those early years were good. I won't lie about that. Michael's real estate development company grew from a one-man operation to Coleman & Associates, employing 15 people and handling commercial projects throughout Connecticut and upstate New York. My marketing career flourished, too, until Emma came along and I made the decision to freelance so I could be more present for our daughter. Emma became the center of our universe, a bright, curious child who inherited Michael's business sense and my creative streak. She excelled academically, played varsity soccer, and had already started researching colleges despite being only a junior. Michael and I fell into the comfortable rhythm of suburban parenting, coordinating schedules, attending school events, and planning family vacations to our treasured lake house. The lake house. God, where do I even start with that property? It sits on 2 pristine acres of Lake George waterfront, a sprawling log cabin-style home with floor-to-ceiling windows that frame the water like living paintings. My great-grandfather built it in the 1940s as a summer retreat for his growing family. My grandmother inherited it, then my mother, and finally it came to me when Mom passed away 5 years ago. Michael had always loved the place, maybe even more than I did. He'd spend hours on the wraparound porch, laptop balanced on his knees, claiming he did his best thinking with the sound of lapping water in the background. He installed a hot tub, upgraded the dock, and convinced me to let him renovate the master suite with a view that stretched for miles across the lake. What Michael didn't know, what he'd never bothered to research despite his expertise in real estate, was the precise legal nature of my ownership. The property had been left to me in my grandmother's will, inherited before our marriage, titled solely in my maiden name of Sarah Matthews. In New York State, that made it separate property, not subject to marital division. But more importantly, far more importantly, the deed included something that would change everything. The mineral and water rights. When my great-grandfather purchased the land in the 1940s, he'd been smart enough to retain all subsurface rights, including mineral extraction and water usage. For decades, these rights had been meaningless, a legal footnote on an old deed. But 6 months ago, everything changed when a renewable energy company began exploring the area for a massive hydroelectric project that would make our little stretch of lakefront incredibly valuable. I'd received the preliminary inquiry letters but hadn't thought much about them. The legal language was dense, and between managing Emma's increasingly busy schedule and handling my freelance projects, I'd set them aside to deal with later. Later became never, and the letters were buried somewhere in my home office, forgotten until this moment when their significance hit me like a lightning bolt. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Michael didn't know about the letters. He didn't know about the potential value of the water rights. Most importantly, he didn't know that despite 17 years of marriage, despite the money he'd spent on renovations and improvements, the lake house belonged entirely to me. As Emma and I sat in our favorite Chinese restaurant, she chattering about college applications while I picked at my lo mein, I realized that my husband's betrayal might have just handed me the most powerful weapon imaginable. He'd moved his Girlfriend into property he didn't own, property that was about to become exponentially more valuable, property that I could control completely. The woman in the security footage, whoever she was, had no idea she was playing house in someone else's dream home. Michael, for all his real estate expertise, had made the amateur mistake of assuming that marriage meant automatic joint ownership of everything. His arrogance had blinded him to the legal reality that would soon become his nightmare. I thought about the wine they'd shared, the casual way she'd moved through my family's space, the intimacy I'd witnessed through the security cameras. While they were busy playing house, I was going to play chess. And unlike Michael, I knew exactly which pieces I controlled on this particular board. Emma reached across the table and squeezed my hand, pulling me back to the present. "Mom, you're really worrying me. Are you sure everything's okay?" I squeezed back, managing what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "Everything's going to be fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually. Sometimes life has a way of working out exactly as it should." She didn't look convinced, but she also didn't push. Emma had learned to read the subtleties of adult conversation, to sense when deeper currents were running beneath surface pleasantries. She was smart enough to know something significant was happening, but wise enough to wait for me to share it when I was ready. As we drove home through the gathering darkness, past houses glowing with the warm light of families going about their evening routines, I felt something shift inside me. The shock was giving way to something harder, more focused. The woman who'd sat in that Starbucks parking lot, stunned by security footage of her husband's betrayal, was already becoming someone else. Someone who understood that knowledge was power. Someone who realized that being underestimated might be the greatest advantage of all. Someone who was about to remind Michael Coleman and his girlfriend that some properties come with ownership structures they never bothered to investigate. The lake house wasn't just my family's retreat anymore. It was going to be the battlefield where I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my future. And thanks to some very old deeds and some very new development opportunities, I was about to hold all the cards in a game Michael didn't even know we were playing. Tomorrow, I would make some phone calls. I would dig out those letters from the energy company. I would call my friend Rachel, who'd built a successful law practice after her own messy divorce. But tonight, I would sit with my daughter, help her with college applications, and savor these last few hours before everything changed. Because once I started down this path, there would be no going back. Michael and his girlfriend were about to learn that some vacation homes come with very expensive surprises, especially when you don't actually own them. I barely slept that night, my mind cycling through 17 years of memories, searching for signs I'd missed, clues I'd dismissed. Michael had always been a good actor, but now I wondered if everything had been performance. The way he'd hold my hand during Emma's school concerts, the anniversary cards with heartfelt messages, the spontaneous weekend getaways he'd plan when work stress got overwhelming. Had any of it been real? Or was I just another project he'd managed with the same calculated efficiency he brought to his commercial developments? At 3 a.m, I found myself in my home office, pulling out files I hadn't touched in months. There, buried beneath tax documents and Emma's school records, were the letters from Adirondack Renewable Energy Solutions. The first inquiry had arrived in November, a formal request for information about my property's water rights and mineral access. The second letter, dated February, was more specific about their hydroelectric project and mentioned preliminary assessments that could reach 7 figures for the right properties. 7 figures. I read that phrase 3 times, my heart racing in the quiet darkness of my office. The lake house, which I'd always thought of as sentimentally priceless but practically modest, was sitting on a potential gold mine. Michael had no idea he'd just handed me the ultimate leverage by moving his girlfriend into what might become one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the Adirondacks. I spent the rest of the night researching Adirondack Renewable Energy Solutions, discovering they were a subsidiary of a major European firm with billions in capital and an aggressive timeline for their New York expansion. They'd already secured permits for 3 other lake properties, and the local news coverage suggested property owners were receiving offers that would set them up for life. By sunrise, I had a plan forming. Not the emotional, reactive plan of a scorned wife, but the strategic thinking of someone who'd spent 2 decades in marketing, understanding how to position products and anticipate market responses. Michael thought he was playing me, but he'd actually given me the perfect opportunity to outmaneuver him completely. Emma found me at the kitchen table at 6:30, surrounded by legal documents and printouts, nursing my 4th cup of coffee. She was dressed for her morning run, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking so much like I did at her age that it took my breath away. "Mom, did you sleep at all? You look terrible." "Thanks for the honesty," I said, managing a smile. "I had some work to catch up on. How about we skip your run today and go get breakfast at that place you love in West Hartford?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "You want to drive 30 minutes for pancakes on a Tuesday morning? What's going on? I need to talk to you about something important, and I'd rather do it somewhere neutral, somewhere we can have privacy." Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Is this about you and Dad?" "Smart girl." "Yes, it is. But let's talk over breakfast, okay?" An hour later, we sat in a corner booth at Emma's favorite diner, the kind of place that served pancakes the size of dinner plates and coffee that could wake the dead. Emma had ordered her usual blueberry stack, but she was mostly just pushing the berries around, waiting for me to explain why her world was about to change. "Your father and I are having some serious problems," I began, choosing my words carefully. "Problems that probably mean we're going to get divorced." Emma's fork clattered against her plate. "What kind of problems?" "The kind where he's been lying to me about important things, about other people in his life." She was quiet for a long moment. "Processing. Other people like another woman?" "Yes." Emma nodded slowly, and I realized she wasn't as surprised as I'd expected. "How long have you known?" "I just found out yesterday. But Emma, I need you to know that none of this is your fault, and it doesn't change how either of us feels about you." "I know that, Mom." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm not a little kid anymore. I've seen how Dad's been acting lately, all secretive with his phone and working late all the time. I wondered if something was going on." Her maturity broke my heart and made me proud simultaneously. "I'm sorry you had to worry about that." "No, 16-year-olds should have to analyze their parents' marriage." "So what happens now? Are you guys going to try counseling or something?" "I don't think counseling works when one person has been building a completely separate life behind the other person's back." I took a deep breath. "Emma, your dad moved this woman into our lake house. They've been staying there together." Emma's eyes widened with genuine shock. "He took someone else to Grandma's house? To our place?" "Yes, that bastard." The word came out with such vehemence that I nearly choked on my coffee. Emma had always been careful with her language, conscious of maintaining her image as the perfect student, the responsible daughter. Emma Coleman, language. "No, Mom, that's exactly what he is." She was getting louder, drawing glances from other diners. "That house means everything to our family. It's where you grew up, where Grandma taught me to fish, where we've spent every summer since I was born. How could he bring some random woman there?" I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, partly to comfort her and partly to calm her down. "I know, sweetheart. I know how violated it feels. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to handle it. But I need you to trust me and let me manage this situation. Your only job is to focus on school and college applications. Can you do that for me?" Emma studied my face, and I could see her analytical mind working behind her green eyes. "You're planning something, aren't you? You have that look you get when you're working on a really complicated marketing campaign." I smiled despite the circumstances. "What look is that? Like you're 3 steps ahead of everyone else, and they don't even know they're playing your game. Yet, out of the mouths of babes, Maybe I am planning something, but I need you to trust that whatever I do, it's to protect our family and our future." We finished breakfast in relative quiet, Emma asking practical questions about living arrangements and school logistics while I tried to project calm confidence. Inside, my mind was racing through timelines and contingencies, already 3 moves ahead in a chess game Michael didn't know we were playing. After dropping Emma at school, I drove straight to Rachel Torres's law office in downtown Westfield. Rachel and I had been roommates at UConn, maid of honor at each other's weddings, and the person I'd called when I needed perspective on everything from career changes to parenting challenges. 3 years ago, she'd gone through her own brutal divorce, emerging stronger and more successful than ever. Rachel's office reflected her personality perfectly, clean lines and modern furniture with touches of warmth that made clients feel comfortable sharing their most personal struggles. She took one look at my face and immediately canceled her next appointment. "What did Michael do?" she asked, closing her office door and gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. "He moved his girlfriend into the lake house." Rachel's expression darkened. "That son of a bitch. How did you find out?" "Security cameras." I showed her the footage on my phone, watching her lawyer's mind immediately shift into analytical mode. "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know yet, but based on the security alerts, at least a week. Maybe longer." Rachel leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled, already thinking like the attorney she'd become. "Okay, first things first. Do you want to save the marriage?" "No." I answered without hesitation, surprising myself with the certainty. Whatever we had is over. I can't trust him, and I won't live with someone who could betray me this completely. "Good. That makes everything simpler." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "Now, let's talk about assets. The house in Westfield is marital property, but the lake house is yours separately, right? Inherited from your grandmother?" "Yes, but Rachel, there's something else you need to know." I pulled out the letters from Adirondack Renewable Energy Solutions. The lake house might be worth millions. Rachel read through the correspondence, her eyebrows rising with each paragraph. "Sarah, do you understand what this means?" "I think so, but explain it to me like I'm a client who knows nothing about real estate law. You own property that's about to become extremely valuable, property that your husband has no legal claim to, and he's just moved his girlfriend into it without your permission." She looked up from the papers, a slow smile spreading across her face. "This isn't just adultery, Sarah. This is trespassing, possibly criminal trespass depending on how we want to play it. What are my options?" "Legally, you could have them both arrested for trespassing right now. You could file for divorce and seek immediate exclusive possession of all marital assets. You could pursue emotional distress damages." She set down the papers and leaned forward. "But I think we should be more strategic than that." "What do you mean?" "Michael doesn't know about the renewable energy project, does he?" I shook my head. "I only just found these letters myself. And he definitely doesn't. Know that the lake house is separate property? He's never asked, and I've never corrected his assumption that it became marital property when we got married." Rachel's smile turned predatory. "Then we have significant leverage. We let him keep thinking he has claim to the lake house. Let him get comfortable with his girlfriend there. Maybe even let him spend money on improvements or modifications. Meanwhile, we document everything, build our case, and when the time is right, we reveal that he's been trespassing on your property and that the property is worth far more than he ever imagined. How long do we wait? That depends on how quickly you want to move and how much evidence we can gather. I'd recommend hiring a private investigator to document the extent of their relationship, get photographs, establish timelines. We'll also want to get a formal appraisal of the lake house, based on the renewable energy project." I felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. This felt like preparing for war, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that level of conflict. Rachel must have seen my hesitation because she leaned forward, her expression softening. "Sarah, I know this feels overwhelming, but you have to understand something. Michael has already declared war on your marriage. He's already chosen to betray you, lie to you, and violate your family's most sacred space. The only question now is whether you're going to fight back strategically or let him dictate the terms of your divorce. You're right. I took a deep breath, feeling something harden inside me. What's the first step? We document everything. Every security alert, every financial transaction, every communication. Then we hire professionals to fill in the gaps. After that, we start making strategic moves to protect your interests and Emma's future. I left Rachel's office with a folder full of paperwork and a timeline that would keep me busy for weeks. My first stop was the bank, where I opened a separate account and transferred enough money to cover legal expenses and private investigators. Michael monitored our joint accounts obsessively, but he'd never bothered to track my small freelance income, which I'd always deposited into a personal checking account he considered too insignificant to notice. That afternoon, I called the private investigator Rachel had recommended, a former police detective named Tom Bradley, who specialized in matrimonial cases. We met at a coffee shop near his office, and I showed him the security footage from the lake house. "How long do you think they've been together?" I asked as he studied the images on my phone. "Based on their body language and the way they move around the space, I'd say this is well established, not a new relationship." Tom zoomed in on one of the images. "See how she opens cabinets without looking? She's been there before, probably multiple times. I'd estimate at least 6 months, maybe longer." The timeline hit me like a physical blow. 6 months meant their affair had started around the time Michael had suggested we spend Christmas at the lake house instead of with my family. 6 months meant he'd been lying to me through Emma's birthday, through our anniversary, through dozens of family dinners and social events where he'd played the devoted husband. "What do you need from me?" I asked, pushing down the emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. Access to the security system, financial records, his schedule, anything that might help establish patterns. Tom handed me his card. "I'll also need permission to conduct surveillance, which might mean following them when they're together. Do whatever you need to do. I want to know everything. How long this has been going on, whether there have been others, what he's told her about our marriage, and his plans for the future." By the time I picked up Emma from school, I had a team of professionals working on my behalf, and a plan that extended months into the future. Emma sensed the change in my energy immediately. "You look different," she said as we drove home. "More focused. I feel different. I feel like I'm finally taking control of my life instead of just reacting to what other people do to me." That evening, Michael came home at his usual time, carrying Chinese takeout and acting like nothing had changed. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, and helped Emma with her calculus homework. The normalcy of it felt surreal after everything I'd learned in the past 24 hours. "How was your day?" I asked as we sat down to dinner, watching his face for any telltale signs of deception. "Busy. We're closing on that Hartford project next week, and the investors are getting nervous about the timeline." He served himself lo mein, the same restaurant we'd ordered from the night before when I'd been reeling from the discovery of his betrayal. I might need to head up to Albany this weekend to smooth things over. Albany, where his girlfriend probably lived, where he'd been conducting his double life while I managed our household and raised our daughter. "That's too bad," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Emma has that college fair on Saturday, and I was hoping we could all go together." Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is important, Sarah. The Hartford project represents 2 years of work." "Of course. I understand. Emma and I will manage fine on our own." After dinner, as Michael retreated to his home office to make phone calls, I helped Emma with her college applications, listening to her dreams about studying environmental science and making a difference in the world. Her passion and optimism reminded me of my own ambitions at her age, before I'd allowed marriage and motherhood to eclipse my professional identity. Later that night, as Michael and I lay in bed reading, I studied his profile in the lamplight, trying to reconcile the man beside me with the stranger I'd seen in the security footage. He looked the same, dark hair graying at the temples, laugh lines around his eyes, the scar on his chin from a childhood accident that had required 12 stitches. But everything felt different now, contaminated by knowledge I couldn't unknow. "Michael," I said suddenly, surprising myself. He didn't look up from his tablet. "Do you ever think about what would happen if we got divorced?" He turned to stare at me, his expression carefully neutral. "That's a strange question. Why would you ask that?" "I don't know. I guess I've been thinking about Rachel's divorce, how complicated everything got with the assets and custody. It made me wonder how we'd handle it if we ever reached that point." Michael set down his tablet, giving me his full attention for the first time in months. "Are you unhappy, Sarah? Is there something we need to talk about?" The irony of the question nearly made me laugh. Here was my cheating husband, asking if I was unhappy, genuinely seeming to care about my emotional state while he maintained a secret relationship in our family's most precious space. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just curious about the hypotheticals, I guess." "Well, hypothetically," he said, settling back against his pillow, "we'd probably split everything 50-50. The house, the retirement accounts, the lake house. It would be messy, but fair. The lake house." He said it so casually, so confidently, revealing his complete ignorance about the legal reality of our situation. In that moment, I realized that Michael's arrogance might be my greatest advantage. He was so certain of his superior knowledge about real estate and property law that he'd never bothered to research the specifics of our most valuable asset. "That makes sense," I agreed. "Fair is fair." As he turned off his bedside lamp and settled into sleep, I lay awake in the darkness, planning my next moves. Tomorrow, I would call the energy company to discuss their project timeline. I would review Tom Bradley's preliminary findings. I would start building the case that would eventually give me everything I needed to reclaim my life and secure Emma's future. Michael thought he was playing me, but he'd actually given me the perfect opportunity to outmaneuver him completely. He'd moved his girlfriend into property he didn't own, property that was about to become worth millions, property that I controlled entirely. The woman lying in bed next to my cheating husband was already planning his downfall, and he had no idea the game had even begun. Tom Bradley's first report arrived in my email 3 days later, and it painted a picture of betrayal that was even more systematic than I'd imagined. The private investigator had compiled a detailed timeline using credit card records, cell phone, data, and surveillance footage that revealed the true scope of Michael's double life. Jessica Parker, 28 years old, had been working as an interior designer for Coleman and Associates for 14 months. The affair had begun almost immediately after she was hired, starting with late dinners that Michael had claimed were client meetings. Tom's investigation revealed hotel receipts, jewelry purchases, and restaurant charges that painted a clear picture of a relationship that had progressed from professional to personal with alarming speed. The most damaging evidence was a series of text messages Tom had recovered through a contact at the phone company. Michael and Jessica had been exchanging messages daily for over a year, many of them explicitly sexual, others discussing their plans for a future together. In one particularly devastating exchange from 3 months ago, Michael had promised Jessica that he would leave me after Emma graduated high school, describing me as financially dependent and emotionally fragile, in a way that made my hands shake with rage. But it was the financial evidence that truly revealed the extent of Michael's deception. He'd been using company funds to pay for their dates, charging personal expenses to business accounts, and even setting up a separate credit card that Jessica used for shopping and travel. The lake house visits had been going on for 6 months, always during times when Michael claimed to be handling business in Albany or Montreal. Most telling was a recorded phone conversation from just last week, where Michael had promised Jessica that the lake house would soon be theirs, and that he was planning to buy out my interest in the property as part of a generous divorce settlement. He'd actually told his girlfriend that he was being magnanimous by offering me half the value of what he considered our shared asset. The irony was almost laughable. Michael was promising his girlfriend a future built on property he didn't own, funded by money he'd stolen from his own business, while describing me as someone who would be grateful for whatever scraps he chose to throw my way. He'd constructed an entire fantasy based on his own arrogance and his fundamental misunderstanding of our legal situation. I was reading through Tom's report for the third time when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a New York number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Mrs. Matthews? This is David Chen from Adirondack Renewable Energy Solutions. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. My heart skipped a beat. I'd been meaning to call them back, but I hadn't expected them to track me down. Not at all, Mr. Chen. I was actually planning to contact your office about the letters I received. Excellent. I'm calling because we've had some significant developments in our Lake George project, and your property has become even more critical to our plans. Would it be possible to meet in person this week to discuss our proposal? We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Albany the following afternoon. David Chen turned out to be a soft-spoken engineer in his 40s who spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years working on projects that transformed entire communities. He spread detailed maps across our table, showing me how my property sat at the exact center of their proposed hydroelectric facility. Mrs. Matthews, I want to be completely transparent with you about what we're planning. This isn't just about electricity generation. We're creating a sustainable energy hub that will serve 3 states and provide clean power for decades to come. Your property's water rights are absolutely essential to making this project viable. He showed me environmental impact studies, engineering reports, and financial projections that made my head spin. The numbers were staggering. They were prepared to offer me $12 million for the water rights alone, with additional annual royalties that could reach 6 figures for the next 50 years. I understand this is a lot to process, David said, watching my reaction. We're not asking for an immediate decision, but we do need to know your intentions within the next 60 days. The regulatory approval process requires certainty about property access. I managed to keep my voice steady as I asked questions about timelines, environmental protections, and community impact. Inside, I was calculating what $12 million would mean for Emma's education, for my financial independence, for the leverage I would have in divorce proceedings. There's one complication I should mention, I said carefully. I'm going through a divorce, and my soon-to-be ex-husband has been using the property without my permission. David's expression grew concerned. Is there any question about your ownership of the water rights? None at all. The property was inherited before my marriage, and it's titled solely in my name. But he's currently staying there with another woman, and they seem to think they have some claim to the property. That could complicate things, David admitted. We'll need clear title and undisputed access to move forward. Have you consulted with an attorney about the situation? I'm working with someone now to resolve the issue. How soon do you need certainty about access? Ideally within 30 days. We can work around temporary complications, but we can't proceed if there's going to be ongoing litigation over property rights. I assured David that I would have everything resolved quickly, though I didn't mention that my timeline was driven by revenge as much as financial opportunity. Driving home from Albany, I felt a familiar excitement building, the same energy I'd felt during my most successful marketing campaigns when all the pieces were falling into place. That evening, I called Rachel with an update on both the energy, company meeting, and Tom's investigation results. Her reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for. Sarah, this changes everything. You're not just looking at a comfortable divorce settlement anymore. You're looking at generational wealth, the kind of money that sets Emma up for life and gives you complete financial independence. What's our next move? We accelerate the timeline. I'm going to file for divorce next week, citing irreconcilable differences. We'll seek immediate temporary orders for exclusive use of the lake house, and we'll include a motion for expedited discovery to uncover any hidden assets. Won't that tip Michael off that I know about the affair? Not necessarily. We'll frame it as a routine property dispute, argue that you need access to your inherited property for business purposes. He'll probably assume you're just being emotional about the divorce. Rachel paused, and I could hear her shuffling papers. The beauty of this situation is that Michael's overconfidence is working in our favor. He's so certain that he understands the legal landscape better than you do that he's not going to see this coming until it's too late. 2 days later, Rachel filed the divorce papers along with a motion for temporary exclusive use of the lake house. The papers were served to Michael at his office, delivered by a process server who interrupted a client meeting to hand him the legal documents. According to Tom's sources, Michael had gone pale when he read the filing, immediately calling Jessica to arrange an emergency meeting. I was working in my home office when Michael came storming through the front door that evening, his face flushed with anger and something that looked like panic. Emma was at soccer practice, which meant we could have the confrontation I'd been anticipating for days. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the divorce papers at me. "You filed for divorce without even talking to me?" I looked up from my laptop with what I hoped was calm indifference. "I think we're past the talking stage, don't you? This is ridiculous, Sarah. We can work through whatever problems we're having. You don't need to involve lawyers and make everything adversarial." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Here was a man who'd been conducting a year-long affair, stealing from his own business to fund his girlfriend's lifestyle, and using our family property as his personal love nest, and he was accusing me of making things adversarial. "Michael," I said, closing my laptop and giving him my full attention, "I know about Jessica." His face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned defiance. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to understand that our marriage is over, and that you've been lying to me about fundamental things for more than a year." He sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk, suddenly looking older than his 45 years. "I never meant for you to find out this way." "How exactly did you mean for me to find out? Were you planning to sit me down for a heart-to-heart about your girlfriend? Or were you just going to keep lying until you figured out how to leave me with as little as possible?" Michael's expression hardened. "I was trying to figure out how to handle this situation in a way that would be least harmful to Emma. By moving your girlfriend into our family's lake house? By promising her a future that includes property you don't even own?" His confidence faltered for just a moment. "What do you mean I don't own it? The lake house was inherited from my grandmother, Michael. It's separate property, titled solely in my name. You have no legal claim to it whatsoever." The color drained from his face as the implications hit him. "But I've put money into that property. I've made improvements, paid for maintenance." "Improvements to someone else's property," I said, enjoying the way his certainty was crumbling. "Improvements that you made without the owner's permission while you were using the property to conduct an extramarital affair." Michael sat in stunned silence for several minutes, and I could practically see him recalculating everything he'd promised Jessica about their future together. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost pleading. "Sarah, I know I've made mistakes, but we can work this out. Jessica was a mistake, a midlife crisis or whatever you want to call it. We can go to counseling, take a vacation, figure out how to rebuild what we had." I studied his face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse or self-awareness. What I saw instead was the same calculating expression he wore when he was trying to close a difficult real estate deal. Even now, even caught in the worst betrayal of our marriage, he was strategizing about how to minimize his losses. "Michael," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me, "you've been lying to me for over a year. You've stolen money from your business to fund your affair. You've violated our family's most sacred space. And even now, you're not apologizing for hurting me. You're trying to figure out how to manipulate me into accepting less than I deserve. "That's not true," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "It is true, and we both know it." I stood, up from my desk, moving to the window that overlooked our backyard where Emma used to play as a child. "The question now is whether you're going to make this divorce process difficult, or whether you're going to accept reality and work with me to create a fair settlement. What do you want, Sarah?" "I want what's mine. I want Emma to be protected. And I want you to understand that I'm not the financially dependent, emotionally fragile woman you described to your girlfriend." Michael's head snapped up. "How do you know about that?" "I know about a lot of things, Michael. I know about the company credit card you gave Jessica. I know about the hotel receipts and the jewelry purchases. I know about your promises to give her the lake house after you divorced me." His face cycled through several emotions before settling on a kind of grudging respect. "You hired a private investigator. I hired several professionals to help me understand the full scope of what I'm dealing with." I turned back to face him. "The question is what you're going to do now, that you know I'm not the naive victim you thought you were divorcing." We spent another hour negotiating the immediate logistics of our separation. Michael would move out of the house within the week and would cease all use of the lake house immediately. He would maintain Emma's expenses and continue paying the household bills until we reached a formal agreement. Most importantly, he would not discuss the details of our divorce with Jessica or anyone else until our legal proceedings were complete. After Michael left to pack a bag and find a hotel, I sat alone in my office, processing what had just happened. The confrontation had been necessary, but it had also been emotionally draining in ways I hadn't anticipated. Despite everything he'd done, despite the systematic nature of his betrayal, part of me still remembered the young man I'd fallen in love with in college. But that man was gone, if he'd ever existed at all. In his place was someone who could lie to my face for over a year, someone who could use our daughter's college fund money to buy gifts for his girlfriend, someone who could promise another woman a future built on property he'd stolen from me. When Emma came home from soccer practice, she found me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, still processing the afternoon's events. "Dad's car isn't in the driveway," she observed, dropping her sports bag by the door. "He's staying at a hotel for a while." We had a talk about our situation, and we agreed that some space would be good for everyone. Emma nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. "How are you feeling about everything?" "I'm feeling like I'm finally taking control of my life instead of letting other people make decisions for me." She came over and hugged me, her arms strong from years of soccer and her embrace fierce with loyalty. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I know this can't be easy." "It's not easy," I agreed, "but it's necessary. And Emma, I want you to know that whatever happens with your dad and me, you're going to be okay. Better than okay, actually." That night, I called David Chen to schedule another meeting about the energy company's proposal. I also called Tom Bradley to expand his investigation into Michael's business practices, particularly his use of company funds for personal expenses. Finally, I called Rachel to update her on Michael's reaction and to discuss our strategy for the upcoming court proceedings. Everything was accelerating now, moving toward a conclusion that would reshape all our lives. Michael thought he'd been playing me for a fool, but he'd actually handed me the perfect opportunity to reclaim my power and secure Emma's future. The lake house that he'd defiled with his affair was about to become the foundation of my financial independence. As I fell asleep that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete confidence in my ability to control my own destiny. The scared, dependent woman Michael had described to his girlfriend was gone, replaced by someone who understood that knowledge was power and that strategic thinking could triumph over casual cruelty. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming everything that was rightfully mine, and Michael would discover that underestimating me had been the most expensive mistake of his life. The court hearing for temporary orders was scheduled for the following Thursday, and I could see Michael's growing panic in the days leading up to it. He'd hired David Morrison, one of Hartford's most expensive divorce attorneys. But even Morrison couldn't change the fundamental facts of our situation. The lake house belonged to me. Michael had been trespassing with his girlfriend, and the property was about to become worth more money than he'd ever seen in his life. Rachel had prepared meticulously for the hearing, assembling a portfolio of evidence that painted a clear picture of Michael's deception and my rightful ownership of the disputed property. She'd also uncovered additional financial irregularities in Coleman and Associates that suggested Michael's theft from the company was more extensive than we'd initially realized. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in a navy blue suit that projected both professionalism and authority. I wanted the judge to see me as a competent businesswoman protecting her assets, not an emotional wife seeking revenge. Rachel met me at the courthouse steps, her confidence infectious as she reviewed our strategy one final time. Judge Patricia Hernandez had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and little patience for marital drama. She listened impassively as Morrison argued that Michael should maintain access to the lake house based on his financial contributions to the property over the years. Rachel countered with the property deed, inheritance documents, and evidence of Michael's unauthorized use of the property for his extramarital affair. Your Honor, my client owns this property outright, Rachel argued, her voice clear and authoritative. Mr. Coleman has no legal standing to claim any interest in inherited property, and his recent use of the property to conduct an affair constitutes trespass and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Morrison tried to paint me as vindictive, arguing that I was using the property dispute to punish Michael for marital problems. But when Rachel presented the security footage of Michael and Jessica making themselves at home in my family's retreat, even Morrison seemed to realize his position was untenable. Judge Hernandez took less than 10 minutes to render her decision. Mrs. Coleman has established clear ownership of the Lake George property through inheritance documentation. Mr. Coleman's financial contributions to maintenance and improvements do not create any ownership interest in separate property. Temporary exclusive use is granted to Mrs. Coleman, effective immediately. She fixed Michael with a stern look. Mr. Coleman, you and any other parties are prohibited from accessing the property without Mrs. Coleman's written permission. Violation of this order will result in contempt of court charges. As we left the courthouse, I felt a surge of vindication that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. Michael had assumed that his superior knowledge of real estate law would protect him, but his arrogance had blinded him to the most basic facts of property ownership. That afternoon, I drove to Lake George with a locksmith and a cleaning crew. The house looked exactly as it had in the security footage, with signs of Michael and Jessica's occupancy everywhere. Her clothes hung in the master bedroom closet next to his. Her toiletries cluttered the bathroom counter. The kitchen was stocked with expensive wine and gourmet food that I knew hadn't come from Michael's legitimate income. I methodically packed everything that belonged to Michael, loading boxes into his truck that I'd arranged to have delivered to his hotel. Jessica's belongings went into separate boxes that would be shipped to her apartment. I took photographs of everything, documenting the extent to which they'd made themselves at home in my property. But it was when I found the notebook in the kitchen drawer that the full scope of their presumption became clear. Jessica had been planning renovations to the lake house, sketching out changes to the layout and researching contractors for major modifications. She'd even contacted several real estate agents about the property's potential market value, though her estimates were laughably low compared to what I now knew it was actually worth. The notebook revealed the fantasy they'd been living, a future where the lake house would become their permanent weekend retreat, where they'd host parties and entertain clients, where Jessica would redesign the interior to reflect her taste. Rather than my family's history, they'd been planning to erase 3 generations of my family's memories and replace them with their own vision of success. I called Rachel from the lake house to update her on what I'd found. The notebook and renovation plans could be used as evidence of their intent to permanently appropriate the property, she explained. Combined with the financial records Tom uncovered, we can argue that Michael was planning to steal the property as part of his exit strategy from the marriage. That evening, I sat alone on the lake house deck, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink. The silence was profound after months of anxiety and uncertainty. For the first time since I'd received that first security alert, I felt completely at peace with the decisions I'd made. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, who was staying at Rachel's house while I handled the lake house situation. "How does it feel to have your sanctuary back?" I typed back. "Like coming home after a long journey." The next phase of my plan required precise timing and careful coordination. David Chen had agreed to extend the energy company's timeline by 2 weeks, giving me time to finalize the divorce proceedings before signing the mineral rights deal. Rachel was working with Morrison to negotiate a settlement that would give Michael a fair share of our marital assets while protecting my separate property and Emma's future. But Michael's financial situation was more precarious than I'd realized. Tom Bradley's expanded investigation had revealed that Coleman and Associates was in serious financial trouble, with several major projects behind schedule and cost overruns that threatened the company's survival. Michael had been using personal funds, including money from our joint accounts, to keep the business afloat while maintaining his lifestyle and funding his affair. The irony was perfect. While Michael had been stealing from our marriage to finance his girlfriend and his failing business, I'd been sitting on a property worth $12 million that could have solved all his financial problems. If he'd been honest with me about his business troubles, if he'd respected our marriage enough to ask for help instead of seeking comfort in another woman's arms, we could have worked together to save both his company and our family. Instead, his pride and deception had cost him everything. The final settlement negotiations took place in Rachel's conference room on a gray October morning. Michael looked haggard, the confident businessman I'd married replaced by someone who seemed to have aged a decade in the past few months. Morrison had clearly explained the mathematical reality of our situation. Michael would receive half of our marital assets, but those assets were far less valuable than he'd assumed. The Westfield house, which Michael had thought was worth close to $2 million, was actually heavily mortgaged to support his business. Our retirement accounts had been depleted by his attempts to save Coleman and Associates. The life insurance, policies, and investment accounts he'd counted on were worth far less than their peak values from several years ago. Meanwhile, my separate property, the lake house he'd planned to claim as part of his generous settlement, was about to make me independently wealthy beyond anything either of us had ever imagined. "Sarah," Morrison said, trying one last time to negotiate better terms for his client, "my client has invested significant money in improvements to the Lake George property. Surely there's some equitable way to compensate him for those contributions." I looked across the table at Michael, seeing not the man I'd once loved, but the stranger who'd systematically betrayed our family for his own gratification. The improvements he made were done without my permission while he was using my property to conduct an affair. If anything, he should be compensating me for the damage he caused to the property's value and my family's peace of mind. The settlement we finally reached gave Michael exactly what the law required: half of our marital assets, custody of Emma every other weekend and one evening per week, and maintenance payments that would help him rebuild his life. What he didn't receive was any claim to the lake house, any share of the energy company deal, or any sympathy for the consequences of his own choices. As Michael signed the final papers, his hand trembling slightly, I felt no triumph or satisfaction. Just a deep sense of justice finally being served and a clear view of the future Emma and I would build together. The divorce was finalized on a crisp November morning, exactly 6 months after I'd received that first security alert. Judge Hernandez signed the decree with the same efficiency she'd shown throughout our proceedings, and I walked out of the courthouse as Sarah Matthews, once again, legally free from the marriage that had defined my adult life. That afternoon, I signed the agreement with Adirondack Renewable Energy Solutions, transferring the water and mineral rights to my Lake George property in exchange for $12 million and annual royalties that would provide substantial income for decades to come. David Chen presented me with a ceremonial check, though the actual funds were transferred electronically to accounts I'd established specifically for this purpose. Emma was with me for the signing, having insisted on being present for what she called the most important business meeting of our lives. She watched with wide eyes as David explained the environmental benefits of the project and the long-term value of the royalty payments. "Mom," she whispered as we walked to the car afterward, "are we really millionaires now?" "We're really financially independent now," I corrected her. "Which means you can choose any college you want without worrying about cost, and I can choose how to spend my time based on what matters to me, not what pays the bills." That evening, we celebrated with dinner at Emma's favorite restaurant. Just the two of us toasting our new beginning with sparkling cider and sharing dreams about the future. Emma wanted to study environmental engineering, inspired partly by the Renewable Energy Project and partly by her desire to make a positive impact on the world. I wanted to restart my marketing consulting business, working with companies that aligned with my values rather than just accepting any client who could pay my fees. As winter turned to spring, our new life began to take shape. I purchased a beautiful colonial house in West Hartford, close enough to Emma's school that she could maintain her friendships, but far enough from our old neighborhood to feel like a fresh start. The house had a home office where I could work and a large yard, where Emma could practice soccer. Michael had been forced to sell Coleman and Associates to pay his debts, though he'd managed to retain a small equity stake that would provide modest income. He'd moved to a studio apartment in Hartford and was working for another development firm, slowly rebuilding his professional reputation. His relationship with Jessica had ended shortly after the divorce was finalized. Apparently, she'd been less interested in sharing his diminished circumstances than she'd been in enjoying his imagined wealth. Emma maintained a relationship with her father, though it was more formal now, shaped by scheduled visits and careful boundaries rather than the easy familiarity they'd once shared. She was thriving academically and had been accepted to several prestigious environmental engineering programs, with her choice ultimately coming down to MIT versus Stanford. I'd started dating again, though carefully and without any rush toward commitment. The experience of Michael's betrayal had taught me to trust my instincts and maintain my independence, even in relationships that seemed promising. I was enjoying the process of rediscovering myself as a single woman, with the financial freedom to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I needed. The lake house remained in my possession, though I'd decided to rent it out during peak season to generate additional income. The rental fees were substantial, given the property's pristine location and luxury amenities, and I enjoyed the irony that the space Michael had defiled with his affair was now contributing to my financial independence. On a warm Saturday in June, almost exactly 1 year after I'd discovered Michael's betrayal, Emma and I returned to Lake George for a weekend of relaxation and reflection. We spent the morning swimming in the crystal-clear water, then sat on the dock eating sandwiches and talking about her college plans. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Dad had never had the affair?" Emma asked, her feet dangling in the water. I considered the question carefully. I think our marriage was already over in all the ways that mattered. The affair was just the catalyst that forced us to acknowledge what had been true for a long time. "Do you regret anything about how you handled it?" I thought about the past year, the strategic decisions I'd made, the professionals I'd hired, the way I'd used Michael's own arrogance against him. I regret that it took a betrayal for me to realize how much of myself I'd given up during our marriage. I regret that you had to witness your parents' relationship falling apart, but I don't regret fighting for what was rightfully ours or protecting our future. Emma nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'm proud of how you handled everything, Mom. You showed me that being strong doesn't mean being cruel, and that being smart is more powerful than being angry." As we sat there watching the water lap against the dock, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The woman who'd received that first security alert had been financially dependent, emotionally devastated, and completely unprepared for the reality of her husband's betrayal. The woman sitting on this dock was financially independent, emotionally strong, and completely in control of her own destiny. Michael had thought he was playing me for a fool, but he'd actually given me the greatest gift imaginable: the motivation to reclaim my power and the legal leverage to secure my future. His betrayal had been the catalyst for my transformation, from victim to victor, from dependent wife to independent woman. The lake house that he'd violated with his affair had become the foundation of my financial freedom. The property he'd assumed he could claim in our divorce had instead provided me with generational wealth that would benefit Emma's children and grandchildren. The mineral rights he'd never bothered to research had turned into the key to my independence. As the sun began to set over Lake George, painting the water in brilliant shades of orange and gold, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been transformative. It had forced me to discover strengths I hadn't known I possessed, and to build a life that reflected my authentic values rather than someone else's expectations. Emma squeezed my hand as we watched the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the mountains. Ready to go inside and plan our next adventure? I squeezed back, smiling at the possibilities that stretched out before us. More than ready. We have a whole future to build together. The morning after the court hearing that granted me exclusive use of the lake house, I woke up feeling like I'd crossed an invisible threshold. The woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal through security camera footage 6 months ago felt like a different person entirely. That Sarah had been reactive, devastated, scrambling to understand how her perfect life had crumbled so completely. This Sarah was strategic, informed, and completely in control of the chess game that would determine her family's future. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen of our Westfield home, the same kitchen where I'd received countless morning texts from Michael claiming to be in business meetings that I now knew were romantic interludes with Jessica. The irony of it all still amazed me. While I'd been managing our household, coordinating Emma's increasingly complex schedule, and supporting what I thought was our shared life, Michael had been systematically dismantling our marriage from the inside out. But his betrayal had also revealed something unexpected about myself. I'd spent 17 years defining myself through my relationship to him, Sarah Coleman, Michael's wife, Emma's mother, the woman who made their lives run smoothly while quietly setting aside her own ambitions. The shock of discovering his affair had shattered that identity completely. But what emerged from the wreckage was someone I was only beginning to recognize. Someone stronger, more capable, and more strategically minded than I'd ever imagined possible. Emma found me at the kitchen island, surrounded by legal documents and financial projections, planning the next phase of what had become the most important campaign of my life. She was dressed for school in her usual combination of academic preparation and athletic determination, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that emphasized her intelligent green eyes and the stubborn set of her jaw that she'd inherited from me. "Mom, you look like you're planning to take over the world," she observed, sliding onto the stool beside me and stealing a piece of my toast. "Just my own little corner of it," I replied, watching her scan the papers spread across the counter. "How are you feeling about everything that's happening?" Emma considered the question with the same careful thought she brought to her calculus homework. "Honestly, I'm proud of you. I know this whole situation sucks, but watching you handle it has been incredible. You're like this completely different person than you were a few months ago. Different how? Stronger. More yourself, if that makes sense. Like you were playing a role before, and now you're just being who you actually are." Her observation hit deeper than I'd expected. Emma was right. I had been playing a role, the role of the perfect wife who supported her husband's career, while managing their domestic life with seamless efficiency. It had been a comfortable role in many ways, clearly defined with predictable rewards and social approval. But it had also been limiting, requiring me to minimize my own ambitions and insights in service of someone else's vision. Michael's betrayal, had destroyed that role completely. But it had also freed me to discover what I was capable of when I stopped filtering my decisions through someone else's expectations. The woman who'd hired private investigators, negotiated with energy companies, and outmaneuvered her cheating husband in court was someone I was still getting to know, but someone I liked considerably more than the woman I'd been before. After dropping Emma at school, I drove to the lake house with a team of contractors and interior designers. The court order gave me exclusive access to the property, but I wanted to do more than simply reclaim it. I wanted to transform it from the scene of Michael's betrayal into something that reflected my own vision and values. The house felt different as I walked through it with the design team, no longer contaminated by the memory of Michael and Jessica's presumptuous occupation. Instead, I saw possibilities for honoring my family's history while creating something new and beautiful. The contractors were impressed by the property's bones, the solid construction and premium materials that had made it a perfect setting for Michael's affair, but would make it an even better foundation for whatever came next. I'd decided to renovate the master bedroom completely, not just to erase the memory of finding Jessica's clothes in the closet, but to create a space that reflected my own aesthetic, rather than the generic luxury Michael had always preferred. The designer showed me plans for floor-to-ceiling windows that would frame the lake view like a living painting, with built-in seating areas where I could work or read while surrounded by the natural beauty that had drawn my great-grandfather to this location decades ago. The kitchen would be expanded and modernized, designed for entertaining the kind of guests I wanted to host rather than impressing Michael's business associates. I envisioned dinner parties with Emma's friends when she came home from college, holiday gatherings with the family members who'd always loved this place, professional retreats where I could combine work with the peaceful inspiration of the mountain setting. But it was the home office plans that excited me most. The designer had proposed converting the small bedroom on the first floor into a professional workspace with custom built-ins for my marketing materials, a conference area for video calls with clients, and a private entrance that would allow me to meet with business partners without disrupting the home's residential atmosphere. As we walked through the renovation plans, I felt a familiar excitement building, the same energy I'd experienced during my most successful marketing campaigns, when creative vision aligned with strategic opportunity. This wasn't just about renovating a house. It was about creating a physical manifestation of the life I was building for Emma and myself. A life based on my own values and ambitions, rather than someone else's definition of success. The renovation would take most of the summer, which gave me time to focus on finalizing the energy company deal and planning my return to full-time consulting work. David Chen had scheduled another meeting for the following week to discuss the technical details of the hydroelectric project and the timeline for accessing the water rights. The more I learned about their plans, the more impressed I became with both their environmental commitment and their financial projections. The renewable energy facility they were planning would provide clean electricity for 3 states, while creating hundreds of jobs in the local community. My property's water rights weren't just valuable, they were essential to a project that would benefit thousands of people for decades to come. There was something deeply satisfying about knowing that my family's land would contribute to something larger than private wealth, though the financial benefits were certainly substantial enough to secure Emma's future and my own independence. That afternoon, I met with Tom Bradley to review his final investigative report. The private detective had compiled a comprehensive dossier of Michael's deception that read like a masterclass in marital fraud. The affair with Jessica had been more systematic than I'd initially realized, involving not just emotional and physical betrayal, but a complex web of financial misconduct that could have legal implications beyond our divorce. Tom had documented Michael's use of company credit cards for personal expenses, his diversion of client payments to cover Jessica's shopping trips, and his creation of fake invoices to justify business expenses that were actually funding his double life. The total amount of money he'd stolen from Coleman and Associates was approaching 6 figures, money that should have been paying employee salaries and business expenses. "Mrs. Matthews," Tom said, spreading photographs and financial records across his desk. I've been investigating marital misconduct for 15 years, and I've rarely seen such a systematic pattern of deception. Your husband didn't just have an affair. He created an entire parallel financial structure to support his relationship with Jessica Parker. The evidence was overwhelming. Credit card statements showing charges at expensive restaurants and hotels on dates when Michael had claimed to be working late. Bank transfers from business accounts to Jessica's personal credit cards. Even receipts for jewelry and clothing that Michael had given Jessica while claiming to me that money was tight and we needed to reduce our household expenses. What are the legal implications of all this? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Tom's expression was grim. What your husband did could constitute embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. If his business partners decide to press charges, he could face criminal prosecution. At minimum, he'll be liable for restitution to the company and could face civil lawsuits from investors who were harmed by his financial misconduct. I studied the evidence Tom had compiled, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. Michael's betrayal of our marriage had been devastating enough, but discovering the extent of his professional misconduct revealed a level of corruption I'd never suspected. The man I'd married, the father of my daughter, had been living a lie, so comprehensive that I wondered if I'd ever known him at all. "Do you want me to forward this information to law enforcement?" Tom asked. Given the amounts involved and the systematic nature of the fraud, the district attorney would probably be very interested in pursuing charges. I considered the question carefully. Part of me wanted Michael to face the full consequences of his actions, to experience the same kind of devastating shock I'd felt when his betrayal was revealed. But another part of me, the part that was Emma's mother, worried about the impact that criminal charges against her father would have on her emotional well-being. Not yet, I decided. Let me discuss this with my attorney and see how it affects our divorce settlement. If Michael cooperates fully with the property division and doesn't try to hide any additional assets, maybe we can resolve this civilly. But if he continues to be deceptive or tries to fight me on the lake house, then all bets are off. Tom nodded, understanding the strategic implications. I'll keep all the evidence secure and ready to turn over to prosecutors if needed. In the meantime, I'll continue monitoring his activities to make sure he's not hiding any other assets or engaging in additional financial misconduct. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing everything I'd learned over the past 6 months, trying to process the complete transformation my life had undergone. The security camera alert that had started this journey felt like something that had happened to someone else, a different woman living a different life based on completely false assumptions. The woman who'd received that alert had been financially dependent on a man who was systematically stealing from his own business to fund an affair. She'd been emotionally invested in a marriage that existed only in her imagination, while her husband built a separate life with another woman. She'd been living in a beautiful house and enjoying a comfortable lifestyle that was funded by money, stolen from investors and business partners. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who owned property worth millions of dollars, who had legal representation that rivaled the best firms in Connecticut, who had gathered evidence that could send her ex-husband to prison if she chose to use it. The transformation was so complete that I sometimes felt like I was looking back at someone else's life. Someone who'd been sleepwalking through her own existence while other people made decisions that affected her future. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel updating me on the settlement negotiations. Morrison had finally convinced Michael to accept the reality of our situation, and they were prepared to agree to terms that would give me everything I was entitled to under Connecticut law. Michael would receive half of our legitimate marital assets, but those assets were far smaller than he'd assumed once his business debts and legal fees were factored in. The Westfield house, which Michael had thought was worth nearly $2 million, was actually mortgaged for more than its current market value thanks to the home equity loans he'd taken to keep his business afloat. Our retirement accounts had been depleted by his attempts to cover his professional losses. The investment portfolio he'd counted on had been liquidated to pay for Jessica's lifestyle and his increasingly desperate attempts to maintain his failing company. Meanwhile, my separate property, The lake house he'd confidently assumed would be divided equally in our divorce was not only entirely mine, but was about to generate more wealth than he'd ever imagined possible. The irony was perfect. Michael's arrogance and ignorance about property law had cost him access to the very asset that could have solved all his financial problems. Rachel had also discovered additional irregularities in Michael's business practices that could complicate his professional future even beyond the divorce proceedings. The Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection was investigating Coleman and Associates for potential violations of real estate licensing requirements, and several former clients had filed complaints about project delays and cost overruns that suggested systematic mismanagement. The man who'd once seemed so successful, so knowledgeable about business and finance, was revealed to be someone who'd been barely keeping his professional life together, while his personal life spiraled completely out of control. His relationship with Jessica had ended as soon as she realized that his promises of wealth and luxury were based on money he didn't actually have. His business partnerships were dissolving as investors discovered the extent of his financial misconduct. His reputation in the Connecticut real estate community was destroyed by revelations about his use of client funds for personal expenses. Emma came home from soccer practice to find me still working in my office, preparing for the next day's meeting with David Chen about finalizing the energy company contract. She dropped her sports bag by the door and flopped into the chair across from my desk, still flushed from 2 hours of intensive training. "How was practice?" I asked, looking up from the contract language I'd been reviewing. "Brutal, but good. Coach, Williams thinks I have a real shot at getting recruited by some Division I schools if I keep improving." She studied my face with the perceptive intelligence that made her such an exceptional student. "How are you doing with all this legal stuff? You look like you've been working for hours." "I have been, but it's good work. I'm finalizing the agreement that's going to pay for your college education and give us financial security for the rest of our lives." Emma's expression grew serious. "Mom, can I ask you something kind of personal?" "Of course. Do you ever miss him?" "Dad, I mean? Not the guy who cheated on you, but the person you thought he was when you married him?" The question hit me with unexpected force. I'd been so focused on the legal and financial aspects of our divorce that I hadn't allowed myself to grieve for the loss of the relationship I'd thought we had. Did I miss Michael? Not the real Michael. The man who'd been systematically betraying our family for over a year. But did I miss the version of him I'd fallen in love with? The ambitious young man who'd seemed to share my dreams for our future together? "I miss the life I thought we were building together," I said finally. "I miss believing that we were partners working toward the same goals. But I don't think that version of your father ever really existed. At least not for as long as I believed it did." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that too. Like, when did he stop being the dad I thought he was and become someone who could do what he did to our family? Was it gradual, or was he always capable of this and I just didn't see it? I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe both. Maybe he changed gradually as his business got into trouble and he felt pressure to maintain our lifestyle. Or maybe I was so invested in believing in our happy family that I ignored signs that he was capable of this kind of deception." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. "I'm glad you found out," she said finally. "I mean, obviously it sucks that he cheated and lied and everything. But I'm glad you didn't spend the rest of your life married to someone who was lying to you every day." Her wisdom continually amazed me. At 16, she was already demonstrating the kind of emotional intelligence and moral clarity that I was still developing in my 40s. The experience of her parents' divorce was teaching her lessons about integrity and self-respect that would serve her well in her own relationships. "You know what I'm most proud of?" she continued. "How you handled everything. You could have just been angry and tried to hurt him back, but instead you were smart about it. You protected us and got justice at the same time." I reached across the desk to squeeze her hand. "Thank you for saying that. There were times when I wasn't sure I was making the right decisions, when I worried that I was being too aggressive or too calculating. Mom, you were dealing with a guy who stole money from his own business to buy presents for his girlfriend while telling you that we needed to cut back on expenses. Being calculating was exactly the right response. The next morning, I met David Chen at the energy company's temporary offices in Albany to finalize the contract for the water and mineral rights to my Lake George property. The facility was bustling with engineers and project managers working on various aspects of the hydroelectric development, and I felt a thrill of excitement at being part of something so significant and forward-thinking. David walked me through the final contract terms, explaining how the $12 million payment would be structured and what the annual royalty payments might look like over the project's 50-year lifespan. The numbers were staggering, more money than I'd ever imagined having access to, enough to ensure that Emma could attend any college she chose and that I could pursue whatever professional opportunities interested me without worrying about financial security. But it was the environmental impact projections that really captured my imagination. The hydroelectric facility would generate enough clean energy to power over 100,000 homes, while creating minimal disruption to the lake's ecosystem. The project would also fund environmental education programs and conservation initiatives throughout the Adirondack region, turning my family's property into a catalyst for positive change that would benefit the area for generations. Mrs. Matthews, David said as we reviewed the signature pages, I want you to know how much we appreciate your cooperation with this project. Your property's water rights were absolutely critical to making this facility viable, and your willingness to work with us has made it possible to move forward with something that will benefit thousands of families. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction as I signed the final documents. My great-grandfather could never have imagined that the land he'd purchased as a family retreat would one day play such an important role in advancing renewable energy technology. But I thought he would have approved of using our family's resources to support something that would benefit the broader community, while also providing financial security for his descendants. The contract signing was followed by a small celebration with the engineering team, who presented me with architectural renderings of the completed facility and explained how the project would integrate with the natural landscape to minimize visual impact. Looking at those drawings, I felt connected to something larger than my personal financial gain, part of a movement toward sustainable energy that would help address some of the most pressing challenges facing future generations. That afternoon, I drove to the lake house to check on the renovation progress. The contractors had made remarkable headway in just 2 weeks, stripping away the generic luxury finishes Michael had preferred and revealing the beautiful original woodwork that had been hidden underneath. The house was beginning to feel like mine again, not just legally, but emotionally, a place that reflected my family's history and my own vision for the future. The master bedroom renovation was particularly striking. The new floor-to-ceiling windows framed the lake view perfectly, and the custom built-ins created cozy reading nooks that invited contemplation and relaxation. This would be a space for renewal and creativity, nothing like the scene of betrayal I'd discovered through security camera footage. But it was the home office that excited me most. The contractors had installed beautiful cherry wood built-ins that would house my marketing materials and provide workspace for the consulting business I was planning to restart. The conference area was designed for video calls with clients around the world, while the private entrance would allow me to meet with local business partners without disrupting the home's residential atmosphere. Standing in that nearly completed office, I felt a profound sense of coming full circle. The woman who'd discovered her husband's affair in a Starbucks parking lot had been someone whose professional identity was subordinated to her role as a supportive wife. The woman standing in this beautiful workspace was someone who was reclaiming her career ambitions and building a business that reflected her own values and expertise. My phone rang as I was reviewing the final details with the lead contractor. It was Rachel calling with news about the divorce settlement negotiations. Sarah, I have good news and interesting news. Which do you want first? Let's start with the good news. Michael has agreed to all our terms. He'll sign the final settlement, Agreement tomorrow, and we can file for the divorce decree next week. You'll get everything we discussed. Plus, he's agreed to cover Emma's college expenses as part of the child support arrangement. And the interesting news? Jessica Parker has retained an attorney and is apparently considering suing Michael for fraudulent misrepresentation. She claims he promised her a lifestyle and financial security that were based on assets he didn't actually own or control. I couldn't help but laugh at the poetic justice of it all. Michael's girlfriend was discovering that he'd been lying to her just as systematically as he'd been lying to me, and she was responding with the same kind of strategic legal action I'd taken to protect my own interests. What are the implications for us? Probably positive. If Jessica sues Michael, it will tie up his assets and make it even less likely that he'll try to challenge our settlement. Plus, it provides additional evidence of his pattern of deception and financial misconduct that we could use if needed. That evening, Emma and I celebrated the impending finalization of the divorce with dinner at her favorite restaurant, the same place where I'd first told her about Michael's affair 6 months ago. The contrast between that conversation and this one was striking. Then, I'd been trying to manage the emotional devastation of discovering my husband's betrayal while reassuring my daughter that our family would survive. Now, I was sharing news of our complete financial security and independence while planning for a future that exceeded anything I'd imagined possible. Emma raised her glass of sparkling cider in a toast. To Mom, who turned the worst thing that ever happened to our family into the best thing that ever happened to our family. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling overwhelmed by gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been transformative, forcing me to discover strengths I hadn't known I possessed, and creating opportunities I never would have pursued while I was comfortable in my role as Michael's wife. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of the renovated lake house, watching Emma and her college friends swimming in the crystal-clear water, while I prepared for a video conference with potential clients for my relaunched consulting business. The transformation was complete, not just of the house but of my entire life. The renewable energy facility was under construction on the far side of the lake, its low-profile and earth-toned materials blending seamlessly with the natural landscape just as David Chen had promised. The quarterly royalty payments had already exceeded projections, providing more than enough income to cover Emma's college expenses at MIT and my own living expenses while I rebuilt my professional practice. Michael had moved to Florida after losing his real estate license and facing civil lawsuits from former business partners. His relationship with Emma was limited to holiday visits and occasional phone calls, a sad end to what had once been a close father-daughter bond. Jessica's lawsuit against him had been settled out of court, though the terms were confidential and Michael's financial situation remained precarious. But perhaps the most satisfying transformation was internal. The woman who'd received that security camera alert had been someone who defined herself through her relationships to other people, whose sense of worth was tied to her ability to support and please others. The woman who now owned a multi-million-dollar property and ran a successful consulting business was someone who understood her own value and refused to accept less than she deserved from anyone. Emma joined me on the deck after her swim, wrapping herself in a towel and settling into the chair beside mine. The late afternoon sun was painting the lake in shades of gold and amber, and the mountains surrounding us provided a backdrop of timeless beauty that had drawn my family to this place for 3 generations. "Mom," she said, studying my face with the perceptive intelligence that continued to amaze me. "You look different than you did a year ago." "Different how?" "Content. Like you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing." I thought about her observation as we watched the sun begin to set over the mountains. She was right. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely aligned with my circumstances, living authentically according to my own values, rather than adapting myself to someone else's expectations or needs. The security camera alert that had shattered my illusions about my marriage had also freed me to discover who I really was beneath the roles I'd been playing. The property deed that Michael had ignored in his arrogance had become the foundation of my independence. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of everything. As darkness settled over Lake George, and the lights of the renewable energy facility twinkled in the distance, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. Michael's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been the catalyst for the most important transformation of my life, from victim to victor, from dependent to independent, from someone who accepted whatever life handed her to someone who created the life she wanted to live. 2 years had passed since that life-altering security camera notification, and I barely recognized the woman I'd become. Standing in the boardroom of my own consulting firm, Matthews Strategic Marketing, I watched my team present a campaign proposal to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company seeking to rebrand their environmental initiatives. The irony wasn't lost on me that my expertise in renewable energy marketing, gained through my own experience with the Lake George hydroelectric project, had become one of our most profitable specializations. The client meeting went exceptionally well, with the CEO praising our innovative approach to corporate sustainability messaging. As my team gathered their materials and exchanged business cards with the potential new client, I felt the familiar rush of professional accomplishment that had been missing from my life for so many years. This wasn't just about supporting someone else's vision anymore. This was about building something entirely my own, something that reflected my values and utilized my skills in ways I'd never been free to explore during my marriage. After the full clients left, I retreated to my corner office with its stunning views of downtown Hartford. The space was everything I'd dreamed of when I was working from home as a freelancer, trying to maintain my professional identity while subordinating it to Michael's career. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the room with natural light. Custom-built shelving displayed awards from marketing campaigns that had exceeded every client's expectations, and the conference table could seat 12 people comfortably for the strategic planning sessions that had become our signature service. But it was the framed photograph on my desk that meant the most to me. Emma at her MIT graduation, radiant in her cap and gown, holding her environmental engineering degree with a smile that could have powered half of Boston. She'd graduated summa cum laude, earned a full scholarship to Stanford for her master's program, and already had 3 job offers from companies working on cutting-edge climate solutions. The financial security I'd gained from the Lake George property had given her the freedom to pursue her passions without worrying about student loans or family financial pressure. My assistant knocked on my office door, interrupting my thoughts. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you who doesn't have an appointment. Says his name is Michael Coleman and that it's personal." I felt my stomach drop, though not with the old anxiety I might have expected. Michael and I had maintained minimal contact since our divorce was finalized, communicating only when necessary about Emma's needs or schedule changes. His unannounced appearance at my office was unusual and potentially problematic, especially given the restraining order modifications we'd negotiated to keep our interactions professional and limited. Send him in, I decided, curious about what could have brought him here after 2 years of careful distance. Michael walked into my office looking like a shadow of the confident businessman I'd once been married to. His expensive suits had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing that didn't quite fit properly. His hair had more gray than I remembered, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. Most telling was his posture, no longer the commanding presence that had once filled every room he entered, but something defeated and diminished. "Sarah, thank you for seeing me. I know I don't have any right to be here." "You're right, you don't." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, maintaining professional distance. "What do you want, Michael?" He sat down heavily, looking around my office with an expression I couldn't quite read. "This is impressive. Really impressive. I always knew you were capable of something like this, even when you were focusing on our family instead of your career." The compliment felt hollow. Too little and far too late. If you came here to tell me how successful I've become, you could have saved yourself the trip. I'm well aware of what I've accomplished. Michael nodded, looking uncomfortable. I came to apologize. Really apologize. Not the half-hearted attempts I made during the divorce proceedings. I know what I did to you, to Emma, to our family. I know how badly I destroyed everything we'd built together. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated emotion. What I saw instead was genuine remorse, the kind of deep regret that comes from fully understanding the consequences of your actions. It was something I'd never seen from him during our marriage or its aftermath. What brought this on? It's been 2 years, Michael. Why now? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our early years together when he was nervous about important presentations. I've been in therapy. Real therapy, not just anger management or the kind of counseling the court ordered. I've been working with someone who's helped me understand how completely I sabotaged everything that mattered to me. Michael paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I lost everything, Sarah. The business, my reputation, my relationships, my self-respect. Jessica sued me for fraud and won. My former partners are still trying to recover money I stole from company accounts. I'm working as a sales associate at a real estate office in Tampa, making a fraction of what I used to earn. The information was startling, though not entirely surprising given what I knew about his financial misconduct. Still, hearing about his complete professional collapse didn't give me the satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt a kind of distant pity for someone who'd destroyed his own life through arrogance and poor choices. I'm sorry to hear that things have been difficult for you, I said carefully. But I'm not sure what you want from me. Forgiveness? Absolution? A recommendation letter? Michael shook his head. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I came here because my therapist helped me realize that I never truly understood what I'd done to you. During our marriage, I thought I was the primary breadwinner, the one carrying the financial responsibility for our family. I thought your contributions were supportive but secondary. He looked directly at me for the first time since entering my office. I was wrong about everything. You weren't just supporting my career. You were sacrificing your own potential so I could succeed. You had the intelligence and capability to build something like this. He gestured around my office. 20 years, ago. But instead, you put your ambitions on hold to manage our household and raise Emma. The acknowledgement was surprisingly painful to hear. Not because it wasn't true, but because it represented a level of insight I'd wished for throughout our entire marriage. How many arguments could have been avoided? How much resentment could have been prevented? If Michael had understood and valued my contributions while we were still together. What I did to you wasn't just adultery, he continued. It was a complete betrayal of someone who'd given up her own dreams to support mine. And then, when I got caught, I tried to manipulate the divorce proceedings to take even more from you. I tried to claim half of property that had never belonged to me, property that represented your family's legacy and your future security. I felt tears threatening, not from sadness but from a complex mixture of vindication and grief for what our marriage might have been if Michael had developed this level of self-awareness earlier. You're right, I said quietly. That is what you did. You took my sacrifices for granted and then tried to steal from me when you got bored with our life together. Michael nodded, accepting the harsh assessment without defensiveness. I know. And I know that Emma won't speak to me anymore except when absolutely necessary. I know that I destroyed the most important relationships in my life for someone who never really cared about me once my money ran out. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. But seeing what you've accomplished, seeing how successful and confident you've become, it makes me realize something else. Maybe I didn't just betray you. Maybe I held you back. Maybe our marriage was preventing you from becoming who you were always meant to be. The observation hit deeper than I'd expected. I'd spent the past 2 years thinking about my transformation as a response to Michael's betrayal, a phoenix rising from the ashes of his deception. But maybe there was truth to what he was saying. Maybe the woman sitting in this office, running a successful company and living life entirely on her own terms, had been trapped inside the role of supportive wife, waiting for the right catalyst to emerge. I don't know if that's true, I admitted. But I do know that I'm happier now than I was during most of our marriage. I'm more fulfilled professionally, more confident personally, and more connected to my own values and ambitions. Michael smiled, sadly. Emma told me about your company when I called her for her birthday. She said you were featured in Forbes as one of Connecticut's most successful women entrepreneurs. She was so proud of you, Sarah. Prouder than I ever saw her when she talked about my business accomplishments. The mention of Emma brought fresh emotion to the surface. Our daughter had indeed flourished in the years since the divorce, not just academically but personally. She'd developed a strong sense of social justice and environmental responsibility that I attributed partly to witnessing the consequences of her father's ethical failures. She'd chosen to study environmental engineering specifically because she wanted to work on solutions to climate change, and her master's thesis on sustainable energy systems had already attracted attention from major research institutions. How is she really? I asked, genuinely curious about Michael's perspective on our daughter's development. She's incredible, brilliant, confident, passionate about making a difference in the world. But she's also angry with me, and she has every right to be. Michael's voice became quieter. She told me that watching you handle our divorce taught her never to accept less than she deserves from anyone. She said you showed her what real strength looks like. I felt a surge of pride mixed with protectiveness. Emma had indeed learned important lessons from our family's trauma, but she'd also paid a price for her father's betrayal that she would carry for the rest of her life. The trust issues she struggled with in her own relationships, her hypervigilance about financial independence, her difficulty believing that people could change or deserve second chances, these were all legacy effects of Michael's actions. She's protective of me, I acknowledged. And she has trust issues that stem from what happened in our family. That's one of the prices of your choices, Michael. Emma learned not to take people at face value because her father spent years lying to her mother. Michael nodded, pain evident in his expression. I know. And I know that I can't undo the damage I caused to her ability to trust people. That might be the thing I regret most. Even more than losing you. I damaged our daughter's faith in relationships and family stability. We sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the weight of the conversation. I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment, from the devastating shock of discovering Michael's affair to the triumph of building a successful business and achieving complete financial independence. It had been the most difficult and transformative period of my life, and I genuinely didn't know if I would choose to undo it, even if I could. Michael, I said finally, I appreciate you coming here and acknowledging what you did to our family. I think it took courage to face me and admit the extent of your betrayal and poor judgment. But I need you to understand something important. He looked at me expectantly. I don't need your apology to move forward with my life. I stopped needing your validation or approval a long time ago. I've built something beautiful and meaningful from the wreckage of our marriage, and I'm proud of who I've become. Your acknowledgement of my worth doesn't change my opinion of myself anymore. Michael's expression shifted, and I could see him processing what I'd said. You're right. You don't need anything from me. You've built a life that's better than anything we had together. I came here thinking I owed you an apology, but maybe what I really needed was to see for myself how completely you've moved beyond what I did to you. I stood up from my desk, signaling that our conversation was coming to an end. I have a business to run, Michael, and you have a life to rebuild in Florida. I hope you can find a way to make peace with your choices and create something meaningful from whatever opportunities you have left. Michael stood as well, extending his hand for a handshake that felt appropriately formal for former spouses who'd found a way to coexist civilly. "Sarah, I know I don't have any right to ask this, but if Emma ever decides she wants to have a relationship with me again, would you support that? Not for my sake, but for hers?" The question caught me off guard, though I supposed I should have expected it. Emma's relationship with her father was her own to navigate, and I'd always tried to avoid influencing her decisions about Michael despite my own feelings about his betrayal. "Emma is an adult now," I replied carefully. "She'll make her own choices about relationships, including with you. But Michael, if she does decide to give you another chance someday, you'd better be worthy of it. She's an extraordinary young woman, and she deserves a father who can match her integrity and character." After Michael left, I stood at my office, windows looking out at the bustling city below, thinking about how much had changed since that shocking security camera notification 2 years ago. The woman who'd received that alert had been living someone else's vision of success, measuring her worth through her ability to support and please others. The woman standing in this office had learned to define success for herself and to pursue her goals without apologizing for her ambitions or capabilities. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, who was wrapping up her first semester of graduate school at Stanford. "How did the big client presentation go today? Are we about to become even more ridiculously successful?" I smiled at her message, appreciating how naturally she'd begun thinking of my business success as something we shared. "Better than expected," I replied. "We might need to hire another account manager if we land this contract." Her response came immediately. "Mom, I'm so proud of everything you've built. You're literally living your best life and showing other women that it's never too late to claim your power." Emma's words captured something I'd been feeling but hadn't quite articulated. The transformation I'd undergone wasn't just about recovering from betrayal or achieving financial independence. It was about claiming the power I'd always possessed, but had never been free to exercise fully. The intelligence, strategic thinking, and leadership abilities that had made my consulting firm successful had always been part of me, but they'd been channeled into supporting someone else's ambitions rather than pursuing my own. That evening, I drove to Lake George for a quiet weekend at the renovated house that had become my sanctuary and creative retreat. The renewable energy facility was now fully operational, its sleek turbines generating clean electricity for thousands of homes. While the quarterly royalty payments continued to exceed projections, the environmental impact had been even more positive than originally predicted, with the facility actually improving water quality in the lake through advanced filtration systems and creating habitats for local wildlife. I walked down to the private dock where I'd spent countless hours as a child learning to fish with my grandmother, thinking about the layers of family history embedded in this place. My great-grandfather had purchased this land as an investment in his family's future, never imagining that it would one day provide financial security for his great-granddaughter. My grandmother had preserved and protected the property through economic downturns and family changes, maintaining a legacy that would benefit generations she'd never meet. And I had transformed the property from a simple family retreat into the foundation of my independence, using its value to rebuild my life and create opportunities that extended far beyond my immediate family. The lake house that Michael had violated with his affair had become the symbol of my rebirth, the physical manifestation of my refusal to accept less than I deserved. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey from that devastating security camera alert to this moment of peace and achievement had been the most difficult and rewarding experience of my life. I'd learned that I was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. I'd discovered that financial independence was about more than money. It was about the freedom to make choices based on values rather than survival needs. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually catalysts for the best things we never knew were possible. Michael's betrayal had shattered my illusions about our marriage, but it had also freed me to discover who I really was beneath the roles I'd been playing. The property deed he'd ignored in his arrogance had become my ticket to a life I never could have imagined while I was married to him. My phone rang, interrupting my contemplation. It was David Chen from the Renewable Energy Company, calling with updates on a new project they wanted to discuss. As we talked about expanding their hydroelectric initiatives to other properties in the region, I realized that my involvement with clean energy development had evolved from a fortunate accident into a genuine passion. The consulting work I was doing with environmental companies felt more meaningful than any of the marketing campaigns I'd managed during my previous career. After ending the call with David, I sat on the deck with a glass of wine, planning the next phase of my company's growth. We were considering opening a second office in Boston to better serve our New England clients, and I'd been approached by several business schools about teaching courses on strategic marketing for sustainable companies. The opportunities seemed endless, limited only by my vision and ambition, rather than by someone else's expectations or needs. The following morning, I woke early and went for a run along the lake shore, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the spectacular fall foliage that transformed the mountains into a canvas of gold and scarlet. The physical activity helped me process the emotional complexity of Michael's visit and his unexpected apology. While I'd meant what I said about not needing his validation, there was something healing about finally receiving acknowledgement of the sacrifices I'd made during our marriage. When I returned to the house, I found an email from my literary agent with exciting news. The book proposal I'd submitted about turning personal betrayal into professional triumph had attracted interest from several major publishers. The memoir would combine my personal story with practical advice for women facing similar challenges, showing how strategic thinking and financial literacy could transform victims into victors. The book deal represented another step in my evolution from private person to public advocate for women's financial independence and professional empowerment. I'd been reluctant initially to share such personal details about my marriage and divorce, but Emma had encouraged me to tell my story as a way of helping other women who might be trapped in similar situations. Women need to know that they can survive betrayal and come out stronger, she'd argued. They need to see that intelligence and planning can triumph over emotional manipulation and financial abuse. Your story isn't just about you anymore, Mom. It's about showing other women what's possible when they refuse to accept less than they deserve. As I worked on revisions to my book proposal that morning, I thought about the women who might read my story and recognize elements of their own situations. The wives who felt financially dependent and professionally diminished. The mothers who worried about their children's futures if their marriages ended. The women who discovered betrayals but didn't know how to transform their pain into power. I wanted them to understand that knowledge was indeed power, that legal advice and financial planning could create opportunities even in the darkest circumstances. Most importantly, I wanted them to know that the worst things that happened to them didn't have to define their futures unless they chose to let them. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, who'd remained not just my attorney, but one of my closest friends throughout my transformation. Heard through the legal grapevine that Michael made an appearance at your office yesterday. Everything okay? I called her back immediately, knowing she'd worry until she heard my voice. Everything's fine. He came to apologize, genuinely this time. No ulterior motives, no requests for help or money, just acknowledging what he'd done and accepting responsibility for the consequences. Rachel was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about that? Surprisingly okay. I think seeing him helped me realize how completely I've moved beyond what he did to me. His apology doesn't change my life or my opinion of myself. It's just closure on a chapter that was already finished. That's healthy, Rachel agreed. You've built something so much better than what you had with him. Speaking of which, I have news. The partners at my firm want to discuss bringing you on as a consultant for divorce cases involving complex business assets. Your expertise in forensic, financial analysis could be invaluable for other women facing situations like yours. The opportunity intrigued me. Using my experience to help other women navigate divorce proceedings involving financial deception felt like a natural extension of the advocacy work I was already doing. It would also allow me to work closely with Rachel, combining our legal and marketing expertise to serve clients who needed both strategic thinking and emotional support. That afternoon, I received a call from Emma with news that made me prouder than any business accomplishment. She'd been selected to present her research on sustainable energy systems at the International Climate Solutions Conference, and her presentation had caught the attention of recruiters from Tesla and other leading clean energy companies. "Mom, I have to tell you something," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "The work you did with the Lake George Renewable Energy Project has become part of my research. I've been using it as a case study for how private landowners can partner with energy companies to accelerate sustainable development. The connection between my personal journey and Emma's professional development felt deeply meaningful. The property that had been the foundation of my financial independence was now contributing to her academic success and future career opportunities. The decision I'd made to sell the water rights to the energy company had created ripple effects that would benefit not just our family, but potentially the broader environmental movement. "Emma, I have to ask you something," I said, feeling suddenly vulnerable. "Are you proud of how I handled everything with your father? I know the divorce was difficult for you, and I've always worried that my approach might have seemed too calculating or aggressive." Emma's response was immediate and emphatic. "Mom, you handled everything perfectly. You showed me that women don't have to be victims, that intelligence and planning can triumph over manipulation and betrayal. You turned the worst thing that ever happened to our family into the foundation for the best life we could have imagined." She paused, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "More than that, you showed me what real strength looks like. Not dramatic gestures or emotional reactions, but strategic thinking and quiet determination. You protected our family's future while maintaining our dignity and integrity. I couldn't be prouder to be your daughter." As evening approached, I stood, once again on the deck of the lake house, watching the lights of the renewable energy facility sparkle across the water. The sun was setting behind the mountains, and the reflection on the lake created a path of golden light that seemed to stretch toward infinite possibilities. The woman who'd received that devastating security camera notification felt like someone from a different lifetime. That woman had been living in an illusion, dependent on someone else's version of success and stability. This woman was living in reality, building success on her own terms and creating stability through her own efforts and intelligence. Michael's betrayal had been the catalyst, but the transformation had been entirely my own work. The property, deed he'd ignored, had become my declaration of independence. The security cameras that had revealed his affair had ultimately revealed my own strength and capability. The worst day of my marriage had become the first day of my real life. As I prepared to return to Hartford the next morning, back to my thriving consulting firm and the book deal that would share my story with women around the world, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. The pain had been real, the challenges had been substantial, but the rewards had exceeded anything I could have imagined while I was trapped in the role of supportive wife. I was no longer Sarah Coleman, Michael's wife and Emma's mother, whose identity was defined through relationships to other people. I was Sarah Matthews, successful entrepreneur, published author and advocate for women's financial empowerment, whose identity was defined by her own achievements and values. The lake house would always be my sanctuary, the place where I'd learned to trust my own judgment and build my own dreams. But my real home now was wherever I chose to be, because I'd finally learned that true security came not from depending on someone else's promises, but from knowing that I could create whatever life I wanted through my own intelligence, determination, and refusal to accept less than I deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.